The barn exhaled a kind of warmth no living body should have left behind. The door groaned when I pushed it open, breathing out the smell of metal and dust. Inside, the straw looked heavy, like it was hiding a lake without water. From the darkness, tools hung motionless, the air still asleep. A cow stood silent, its breath a pale ghost in the cold. Outside, only one set of footprints in the snow. They led in. None led out. I never look at faces first. Edges tell the truth. On the threshold, the snow was perfect, untouched except for one narrow trail of footprints. Steady. Calm. Deliberate. They stopped at the door and vanished, like the house had swallowed them whole. Inside, the air was wrong. It wasn't just warm, it was occupied. On the table, breadcrumbs formed a perfect half-circle, as if someone had eaten quietly, carefully. The old newspaper was still damp, dated 3 days ago. Every clock on the wall was wound, each one stopped at the same time, their hands frozen mid-tick. That's not accident. That's command. The kitchen smelled faintly of smoke and milk. No dishes in the sink. No signs of rush or fear. Just order. The kind of order that doesn't come from cleaning, but from control. I touched the chair closest to the stove. It was warm. Not from the fire was dead. Something else had been here recently, close enough to leave its temperature behind. The floor creaked under me like breath in a chest too full of secrets. I checked the lanterns. Their wicks were trimmed, the oil half-filled. The person who did this didn't just stay here. They lived here. And for the first time, I wondered if maybe this house didn't belong to the family at all. Maybe they were the guests. Maybe they'd overstayed their welcome. Outside, the snow began again, soft and steady, sealing away the last of the prints. Time, like the clocks, held its breath. I closed my notebook and whispered to the empty room, "This place remembers more than it should." The attic comes first. Always. You start where breath shouldn't exist. The ladder was worn smooth, too smooth, by hands that climbed it more than the family ever did. Up there, dust didn't fall, it hovered, like it was listening. The air smelled of wood rot and something faintly sweet. Straw pressed flat in the corner, a space where a body might have waited, not slept. A half-eaten apple sat nearby, still fresh enough to glisten under the lantern light. And on the beam, a fingerprint black with soot right where it shouldn't be. Whoever had been here wasn't hiding from the family. They were living among them, quietly, unseen. Watching. Learning the rhythm of their prayers, their meals, their silence. I crouched low, tracing the dust. There was a trail, faint, the size of a hand, as if someone had crawled closer to the edge to look down at the rooms below. Through a gap in the floorboards, I could see the table downstairs, the clock on the wall. From here, you could watch everything, the father reading, the mother cooking, the children asleep. All of it, framed like a play for one audience. The dust trembled. Maybe it was me. Maybe it was the house. In that stillness, I realized something: the attic wasn't empty. It never had been. This place had been lived and occupied long before the bodies were found. It had grown used to being watched, to being shared. When I touched the beam again, the wood gave a sound, low and tired, like a whisper drawn from memory. And in that whisper, it almost said my name. Time doesn't die here, it stops to listen. 3 clocks, in 3 different rooms, all frozen at the same minute. That isn't neglect. That's obedience. Someone ordered time to kneel, and it did. Behind the pantry wall, a narrow crawlspace. When I slid the panel aside, the air came out warm, human. Straw spread neatly, a blanket folded twice, the kind of care only someone who plans to stay would bother with. It smelled faintly of sweat and candle smoke. Whoever lived there was small, light enough not to wake the boards. I stood still. The silence was too perfect. Then I saw it, one window without frost. All the others were sealed with ice, but that one, it breathed. The glass fogged from the inside. That's where he watched from. Outside, by the woodpile, a patch of snow packed flat, the outline of a chair that wasn't there anymore. You could see the bedroom window perfectly from that spot. A man could sit there for hours, night after night, until the shape of the house sank into him like a song. This wasn't rage. It wasn't even crime. It was repetition ritual. Someone rehearsed this. Every footstep, every door creak, every sound this house could make. He practiced silence until it obeyed him. When I closed the crawlspace door, the air behind it felt heavier. Like the house had been holding its breath while I looked. Now it could breathe again. And somehow, I knew it wasn't done. Method doesn't scream. It hums quietly in the corners, waiting to be noticed. Every tool in the barn was hung back in place, every one except one. The missing mattock. The one tool too clean for a place that has seen years of dirt. No blood, no stain, not even dust. Just polish, as if it had been washed in care. The straw underfoot was pressed in strange patterns, circular, controlled. Not panic. Not chaos. A ritual. The floor remembered movements that people weren't supposed to repeat. I followed the prints, expecting a mess. But the door between the barn and the house was locked from inside. He didn't break in. He was already part of it. Already a feature, not an intruder. The air smelled faintly of iron and oil. Not death, preparation. Whoever did this wasn't rushing. He knew what every sound would mean. Every squeak of a hinge, every breath of wind through the boards. Even the animals had gone quiet, as if they knew the rehearsal was over. I touched the wall near the latch. The wood felt warm, like skin. And under my hand, the faint pulse of something moving, not fast, just steady. Like a heartbeat that belonged to the house itself. I stepped back, lantern low. The shadows seemed too still, too deliberate. Houses like this don't forget the people who walk them. They memorize the rhythm, step by step, until it becomes their own. And once they've learned your pace, they don't let go. Villagers talk louder in daylight. It makes them feel safer. They whisper at night, but by morning, the fear turns into gossip. The postman told me the newspapers had been taken off the porch, though no one was left alive to read them. He said the papers were still damp from frost when he dropped them off, then gone by afternoon. Someone inside was keeping up with the world. At the blacksmith's, a man mentioned a stranger who'd passed through, quiet, polite, always paid late, and always smiling without teeth. He smoked something sweet. Too sweet. That detail stayed with me. Back at the farm, I walked the perimeter. On a wooden post near the barn door, 5 marks carved with care, 4 deep, 1 shallow. Fresh. Snow brushed clean in a neat half circle around them, as if someone didn't want the pattern ruined. By the well, I found tracks that didn't match the others. Smaller, lighter, circling once, then disappearing behind the shed. A twig lay across the snow, swept back and forth like a broom. Someone had tested how much the snow could remember before it covered its own story. The neighbor swore she saw light in the attic that night, a faint pulse, on and off, like a lantern signaling from inside the dark. I nodded, wrote it down, and didn't argue. It didn't matter if I believed her. It mattered if the house did. When I looked up, the window she spoke of was empty, but the curtain swayed, slow and deliberate, as if someone had just stepped away from the glass. Night tells the truth that daylight hides. The air grows heavier, full of breath that doesn't belong to me. The boards creak in the wrong rhythm, as if remembering someone else's weight. Around 2 in the morning, something moves across the roof, 1 step, then silence. The house waits. A plate on the table shifts half an inch. No wind. No draft. Just intent. The attic sighs above me. The barn answers with a groan. The dog outside barks once, sharp, then never again. Even silence here feels rehearsed. I light the lantern, and for a heartbeat, dust rises in the glow, not random, not drifting, spiraling, as if following something unseen. When the light flickers, it breaks apart, and in that moment, I swear I see it, a shape where air should be. I hold my breath. The sound of breathing continues. slow, steady, behind me. I turned, nothing. Only shadows that refused to move. The wick bends, the flame leans left, as though the house itself had just inhaled. My notebook lies open on the table. The last line I wrote is trembling, ink bleeding outward like a wound that won't close. It reads, "He never left." And then, as if to prove it, something small and unseen brushes past my shoulder. Not cold. Warm. Human. Dawn crawled in slow, gray, and tired. The frost on the windows glowed faint blue, like veins under the skin. I hadn't slept. The house hadn't either. I held a match between my fingers, unlit. The cold bit deeper than it should have. Outside, by the barn door, 4 small stones were lined in a row. A 5th had rolled away, just slightly off pattern. Nothing accidental lives here. The post still carried its carvings, 4 deep, 1 shallow. But now, frost had settled into the cuts, outlining them like open eyes. They almost shimmered when the first light touched them. The snow near the barn was smooth again, but beneath that perfect surface I could see darker shapes, prints, erased then buried. Someone had taken time to make sure nothing told a story anymore. Even the silence was polished clean. I wrote in my notebook, repetition. Precision. Ownership. And next to it, a single word, inheritance. A ritual needs witnesses. And now there was only me. From the tree line, I thought I saw movement, a dark shape standing still against the pale morning. When I blinked, it was gone. Only mist where it had been. The animals hadn't touched their feed. The lantern on the porch was still burning. But no one had lit it. That was when I realized maybe he didn't stay because he couldn't leave. Maybe the house keeps what it needs. The attic again. I told myself it was for evidence, but curiosity speaks the same language as fear. Dust hung in the air like smoke. The light from my lantern caught it just right, each speck moving in a rhythm too perfect to be random. It was breathing with me. On the floorboards, numbers carved shallow into the dust. 1. 1. 2. 3. 5. A pattern. A sequence. Something counting, or remembering. I didn't write them there. But they were written for someone who could read. In the corner, a tin box half buried in straw. Inside, buttons, a bent nail, a scrap of newspaper in a language I didn't understand. The page was dated weeks before the killings. Whoever lived here wasn't visiting. He'd been waiting. I ran my hand across the beam. 5 small scratches in one cluster, then another, and another, like days tallied by something patient. The last one was still raw, splinters sharp, the wood pale and fresh. Below me, the floor of the living room side, a long, quiet sound like someone shifting their weight. I turned down the lantern, listening to the old boards talk. There was movement. Slow. Deliberate. Not behind me. Under me. I froze. And then the dust lifted again, not from wind, but from something walking across the attic floor. I whispered to no one, "You were here last night, weren't you?" The dust settled, but the space beside me stayed heavy. That was answer enough. The bedroom smelled of dust and soap, like someone had cleaned too late. The mirror on the wall was turned to face the wood. No one does that by accident. When I lifted it, my reflection lagged behind, just a blink late, but enough to make me feel watched. Behind the mirror, a hole, small as a hand. Through it, cold air seeped in. A peephole. An eye for whoever wanted to watch the family sleep. The wallpaper around it was worn smooth by skin. The bed was neatly made, the kind of neat that feels staged, not lived in. One pillow was turned upside down, the seam cut open, feathers spilling like snow. I lifted one, it was still soft. In the nightstand, a metal box labeled fur arbite. Inside, nothing but a gray stain, a pinch of ash pressed into the corner like it had been touched 1,000 times. The lid was still warm. On the windowsill, a shred of fabric caught between the frame and the glass. Outside, the snow untouched. That meant someone had reached in from the dark, opened the window, and closed it again, slow enough not to wake anyone. I listened. The house was quiet, but not empty. Quiet like a throat that had forgotten how to speak. I closed the mirror, turned it back to the wall. Some things are meant to watch. Others, to be watched by. The floor under me creaked once, like approval. Time doesn't run here. It folds. Every clock in this house stopped at the same minute, but each one ticks when I walk past like they remember movement, not time. On the table, an old notebook, its last page burned at the edges. One number carved deep into the wood below it, 31. A day? A count? Or maybe just a warning. By the well, the rope had been cut clean. Fresh fibers, pale and frayed, still damp. The bucket was gone. When I leaned over, the water didn't reflect my lantern, it reflected light from somewhere deeper. Something glowed far below, steady, yellow, patient. For a moment, the reflection changed. It looked like my face, but younger. Smiling. It vanished when I blinked. The air around the well was colder, but the boards beneath my feet were warm. That warmth rose through the ground, like the house was breathing from below. I went back inside. The furniture stood perfectly arranged. Not one thing out of place. No dust where there should have been dust. No chaos. Just order. Beautiful, deliberate order. A lantern on the shelf gleamed spotless. No oil inside. No soot on the rim. Someone had cleaned it to look ready, but never meant to light it again. In my notebook, I wrote a single line, "The house is waiting." And as I closed the cover, I heard a clock start ticking again, backward. The house spoke softly that morning. Not in words, in rhythm. The walls expanded and settled like lungs, timed perfectly with my breathing. I sat in the dining room, listening. The light through the curtains had gone blue, like the sky forgot how to warm itself. The air pressed close, as if the room itself wanted to lean in and listen too. On the table, a plate. Clean. Except for one strand of hair, black, thin, too long to be mine. I watched it curl and uncurl with each draft of air. It was breathing too. In the drawer, I found a coin. Not local. Polished. A small cross carved into its back with something sharp. Someone had kept it close, rubbed it smooth in their palm until it became a charm. Superstition is the last defense of the guilty. The door between the barn and the house was cracked open again. I hadn't left it that way. From the darkness beyond came a sound, not footsteps, not wind, breathing. Slow, deep, deliberate. I pushed the door. The hinges didn't creak. They moved like they were used to this. Inside, the smell had changed. No longer iron and straw. Now, wax and something sweet, rotted fruit maybe. A new kind of decay. On the beam above me, a fresh scratch, vertical, deep, and below it, a scrap of paper pinned with a nail. When I touched it, it disintegrated. Just one letter remained, burned into the wood beneath. That was when I realized I wasn't collecting clues. I was reading replies. In the room where time stopped, the floorboards didn't match. One plank, lighter than the rest, sat loose, almost waiting to be lifted. I pried it open with the edge of my knife. Beneath it, a hollow space, a pocket the size of a small box. The box itself was gone, but the outline remained, a perfect square in the dust. Around the edges, marks. Tiny cuts in the wood. 2 vertical, 3 horizontal, 1 diagonal running through the middle. A message, maybe. Or a warning for whoever would come next. I drew it into my notebook, tracing every line. Later, when I compared it to the marks carved into the barn post, I realized they were identical, only mirrored. Someone had written a language backwards. A code meant to be read from the wrong side of things. Inside the wall near the door, my hand found something soft. Fabric. I pulled it free, a piece of pillowcase, stuffed into a hole with feathers still clinging to it. It smelled faintly of skin. Human. Not a trophy. Not even memory. Just something kept. Possession for its own sake. The chair beside me creaked, once. Then again. Every fourth breath, perfectly timed with mine. The house was mimicking me. I wrote, house. Barn. Well. All one rhythm. And then, under it, not coincidence. In the window, my reflection wavered. For a moment, another shape moved behind me. When I turned, nothing. But the glass still held both of us. It took longer than it should have for the image to fade. Morning came soft, gray, and wrong. The air smelled like burnt milk and smoke. When I stepped into the barn, the stove was still warm. Someone had used it recently, too recently. In the ash, faint shapes. Not words. Not numbers. Symbols. Curves and dots arranged like music, drawn by a hand that wasn't guessing. I stared until the lines started to move, not with the wind, but as if the heat underneath was still alive. Beside the stove, a tin cup half full of milk. Steam rose from it. Still warm. No one could have left it there more than a minute ago. On the beam above the stall, 6 cuts. Fresh. The wood pale at the edges, still smelling of resin. Yesterday, there had been 5. Now there were 6. He was still counting. I walked to the house. The snow outside untouched. That meant only one thing. He hadn't come from outside. He'd never left. On the kitchen table, a single page from my notebook. My handwriting. But I hadn't written it. The ink was still wet. For words, simple, perfect, don't look where I am. My throat went dry. I set the page down slowly. If he was writing now, that meant he was close enough to watch me read. The lamp flickered, casting 2 shadows on the wall, both mine. Both moving out of sync. I closed the notebook and whispered to no one, maybe he's not haunting the house. Maybe the house is haunting him. But deep down, I knew that was a lie I wanted to believe. The sound came from beneath me. Not footsteps. Not rats. Something slower, a breath trapped under the floorboards. I knelt, pressed my ear to the wood. The rhythm was steady. Not heartbeats. Breathing. Someone or something was matching mine. I pried open the board. Below, the air was wet and cold, and the smell a mix of soil, rust, and old water. Inside the hollow space, a piece of fabric, dark and stiff with time. Beneath it, mirror shards, arranged carefully into 2 shapes. Eyes. Not random. Perfectly aligned to look up. Between them, a small bone. Smoothed by touch, polished by patience. Too small to be animal. Too precise to be trash. Whoever made this wasn't hiding something. They were building something. I held the lantern close. Its flame reflected in the mirrors, 2 orange dots staring back at me. When I moved, they didn't. They waited. Then, faintly, a whisper. Not words, just one long sigh. It came from the open floor, as if the house was exhaling for the first time. I stood slowly. The door behind me closed on its own, wood settling with a sound like satisfaction. The lantern flickered, and in that brief light, the shadow beside mine seemed taller, leaner, familiar. I picked up my notebook. My hand shook, but the line I wrote came out clean, the house knows me now. When the lantern went dark, I wasn't sure which one of us was still breathing. Dawn came blue and hollow. The snow outside lay untouched, a perfect white sheet covering every trace of what had happened here. The air was so still, I could hear the frost settling on the window glass. On the beam above the stable, 15 marks. Each deeper than the last. Not carved in anger. Carved in record. A diary written by something that doesn't use ink. I touched the newest cut. The wood was wet, fresh. I wasn't the one who made it. But it was still warm, as if whoever did had only just stepped away. I walked to the well. The water was calm, too calm. 2 buttons floated on the surface. I recognized them. The same 2 I'd found days ago and pocketed. They'd come back. In the kitchen, all the clocks ticked again, but every one of them backward. The hands moved against time, turning the world in reverse. I watched the seconds fall apart. The lantern on the table flared suddenly, cracking the glass. It should have gone out, but the flame kept burning inside the shards, steady, unshaken, as if it finally found the air it wanted. I sat down. My notes were still open from last night. A new sentence had been written at the bottom in my handwriting: "The house chooses who stays." The words were neat. Measured. I don't remember writing them. Outside, the wind shifted. The door creaked but didn't move. Something in the rhythm of the clocks changed, their ticks began to sync with my heartbeat. I whispered to the empty room, "If the house remembers us all, who remembers the house?" No answer. Just the slow, patient breathing of wood. And it sounded almost content. Silence has a sound here. You don't notice it at first, but once you hear it, you can't make it stop. I sat at the table with my notebook open. The pages trembled like something was breathing beneath them. The ink on my last sentence hadn't dried. It rippled tiny waves, as if the paper were alive. Everywhere I turned, the walls moved with me, expanding and settling, softly keeping time. The boards beneath my boots answered each step with the same rhythm, one heartbeat, shared. From somewhere deep inside the house, a low hum rose up, the kind of sound that doesn't reach your ears, only your bones. I listened, and realized it was matching my pulse exactly. The house wasn't echoing me. I was echoing it. The rope by the well had disappeared overnight. In its place, a shimmer, light reflecting from somewhere far below. When I leaned over, I saw a lantern burning under the water, its flame steady, its reflection smiling before I did. Inside, I touched the beam marked 16. The wood was damp, but warm under my hand. Something shifted behind the walls, not footsteps, just the sound of breath changing direction. I wrote, "Observation has become imitation." Then, lower, "I don't know who is recording who anymore." When I looked up, my reflection in the window was already writing the next line. I watched it finish the sentence before I knew what the words were. By the 7th night, the walls had learned my name. I heard it in the creak of the staircase, in the breath that moved through the keyholes. Not a voice. Just the sound of something remembering. The corridor stretched longer than before. I counted 9 steps, but when I turned back, the door I came through was gone. In its place, a shadow, shaped like a man standing still, shoulders slightly turned, waiting for me to speak first. I whispered, "I know you're here." The floor answered with a long sigh. That was enough. On the table lay a piece of paper from my own notebook. My handwriting, but written from right to left. The words read, "Don't look into the well." The ink was fresh. Still shining. I hadn't written it, but I remembered doing it. In the bedroom, the pillow was dented, as if someone had just risen from it. 2 buttons rested on top, placed like eyes, watching the door. Frost gathered around them in a perfect circle. I picked one up. It was warm. Not from the room, from touch. Mine. The clocks started ticking again, but each in a different tempo, like a choir that couldn't agree on a rhythm. The house was teaching me a new one. When I stepped into the hallway, the light from my lantern turned pale, as if the flame was afraid to burn too bright. Shadows moved where they shouldn't, stretching toward the sound of my breathing. I stopped walking. The house didn't. For the first time, I wasn't sure which of us was following the other. Morning didn't arrive. It just appeared, colorless, weightless, as if light had forgotten where to fall. The snow outside was perfect again. No footprints. No path leading anywhere. It looked less like ground, and more like a sky turned upside down. The house had grown silent. Not empty, listening. Every surface, every corner, waiting for something to move, or maybe for me to stop moving first. I opened the window. The world outside didn't react. No wind. No sound. Even the cold had gone still. The table was covered in objects that hadn't been there last night: a spoon, a cracked lantern, a folded handkerchief, all arranged like exhibits. Each one belonged to someone who wasn't coming back. The air felt thick, like underwater. I wrote in my notebook, "Every house needs a keeper." The pen bled ink, the lines spreading outward like veins. When I looked away, the words were already fading. From the well came a sound. Soft. Steady. Breathing again. It echoed through the floorboards, matching my own heartbeat perfectly. I pressed my hand against the wall. Warm. Alive. The house didn't just remember me now. It was speaking through me. Outside, snow began to fall again. Heavy, slow flakes that erased the last marks of movement. And when they touched the window, they didn't melt. They just stayed, watching back. Dawn crawled in, pale and tired, its light the color of ash. The fog outside pressed against the windows, soft, patient, unbroken. The house didn't move anymore. It didn't need to. Everything in it already knew its place. On the beam, 19 marks now. The last one cut deeper than the rest, almost to the heart of the wood. Each stroke clean, practiced, deliberate. Like a ritual finishing itself. My notebook lay open on the table. The ink on the page shimmered faintly, then sank into the paper, vanishing one word at a time. I couldn't remember what I had written. Only that it had felt important. The mirror in the hallway had turned to face the room again. I caught my reflection in passing. It looked back before I did. For a moment, its lips moved, mine didn't. I didn't hear words, but I knew what it said: stay. The floor beneath me groaned, long, slow, almost affectionate. Outside, fog rolled closer, swallowing the barn, the trees, the sky. Only the house remained. I tried to write one more line, something to mark the end of the investigation. But the pen wouldn't move. It stayed pressed against the page, drawing a single black dot that spread wider and wider until the paper was gone beneath it. When I looked up, the fog had reached the windows. There was no reflection anymore. Just a faint outline where my face should have been. And in that stillness, the house whispered, not with breath, but with silence. It said my name like it had owned it all along. By the time the fog lifted, there was nothing left to see. The farm stood alone, a small dark shape in an ocean of white. No path. No road. No world beyond it. Inside, the air was clear, almost gentle. The clocks had all stopped again, their hands resting at the same moment, the one where I had found them. A perfect loop. On the table, my notebook lay open, a single sentence written across the last page: "The farm remembers." The ink was dry, but I could still feel its warmth beneath my fingers. The lantern flickered once, just once, and then the flame stood still, bright but frozen, casting no shadow. I sat down in the chair, the one I had seen in the attic, the one that was never supposed to move. Outside, snow whispered against the windows. The house exhaled, slow and full, as if settling into sleep. Somewhere deep below, a clock ticked, once forward, once back. A heartbeat, not mine anymore. When the light finally dimmed, it didn't go out. It folded inward, like the house was keeping it for later. If anyone ever comes here again, they'll find the place quiet, warm, still. And if they listen closely, they'll hear it too, a breath, slow and patient, waiting to learn a new name.